That means we're about to begin. That's fun. Yeah, exactly. Such an honor to welcome back our theologian in residence, Rabbi Stephen Pearce. Let's give him a warm welcome. Welcome back. So we're going to jump into some Hebrew text, some more Hebrew text scriptures this morning. So I will, without further ado, I'll pass it on to Rabbi Stephen. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to see you. It's a bit of a challenge to follow such an inspired sermon, but I'll do the best I can. So I want to talk about change today, about the way we deal with it, how it enables the progression of religious life to move forward. And so I've got two quotes on the board here. The theologian Yoda, always in motion is the past. And this is a definition of tradition. It's a triple negative. Nothing that never was done before should not be done now. That is the definition of tradition. We often get stuck where we are. So we're going to explore how religion responds to changing times when divinely revealed texts instruct that every word must be perfect and that nothing old can be taken away and nothing new can be added. And I will focus on the ingenious innovation of Christian scriptures and rabbinic literature that made it possible to seamlessly slip new interpretations under the guise of being as legitimate as the original law on which it is based, even if at times the reinterpretation is contrary to the Holy Writ. So the one other thing that I should put on here on the board is the iron law of oligarchy. The iron law of oligarchy. I'm glad you asked. All organizations, including those committed to democratic ideals and practices, invariably succumb to oligarchy, ruled by the elite few. In simple terminology, the first responsibility of any group in power is to maintain itself in power. That's it. So I want to share a couple of texts from Hebrew Scriptures that talk about the immutability, the lack of the ability of the text to change, and then see how it is that the rabbinites or the Pharisees are able to actually outmaneuver this and then provide a model for early Christians. And now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and rules I am instructing you to observe. You shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I enjoin upon you. You shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away. Does that say it? It's fixed, right? I'm sorry? Oh, asking, of course asking is allowed because you have such wonderful questions. But let me just get into the meat of it, and then, of course, we're going to entertain questions. So also from Deuteronomy, whatever I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add or take away from it. You shall not add or take away from it. And two more texts. When they have announced to you the verdict in the case, you shall carry out the verdict that is announced, observing scrupulously all of their instructions. And one more, in case there's any doubt that you don't touch the sacred text. Gather the people, men, women, and children, the strangers in your communities, that they may hear and so learn to revere the Lord your God and observe faithfully every word of this teaching. Could it be any clearer? So the real question is, how does tradition ultimately have the ability to have a vote, but not a veto? That's the critical thing. Does the past have a veto power, or does it merely have a vote? That's the question I'd like to answer today. So I want to talk for a minute about Mount Sinai. What did Moses get at Mount Sinai? A piece of rock. Two pieces of rock. And some of you have seen the great, is it the Mel Brooks piece? Where he comes down with 3 tablets. He says, I have 15 commandments. And then one of them falls and breaks. He says, I have 10 commandments. So he has 2 pieces of rock that are supposed to be inscribed with the law. Did he get anything else? Okay, well, there are a number of interpretations. First of all, some people say that what Moses got at Mount Sinai was only the first letter of the first word of the 10 Commandments. Which in Hebrew is Anochi, I, the Lord your God, I am the Lord your God. That's all he got. Some people say, no. All he got was, no, I guess I didn't put this correctly. All he got was the first letter of the first word, Anochi, which is a silent letter. So what did Moses get? Well, you can make a case for that because you can say that's the breath of the Most Holy, that somehow God breathed the sacredness of the text into him. Or some people say, no, he got the first word, Anochi, I am. Some people say, no. Like all of you. What did he get? The 10 Commandments. The rabbi said, no, he got a lot more than that. He got the entire Hebrew Scriptures. After all, he was up there 40 days, chiseling away. I mean, 10 Commandments, you could probably knock that off in a couple of hours. I don't know if that's right, but... So 10 Commandments, the entire Scriptures, but then the Rabbinites, the Pharisees, and I recognize that in Christian Scriptures, both the Pharisees and the Sadducees are problematic. But these, yeah, right? Of course. But these are the people that will set the tone for and will set the stage for Christianity. What the rabbis say is, not only did he get Anochi, not only did he get the 10 Commandments, not only did he get the entire Hebrew Scriptures, he got one other thing. When God was done giving dictation, he said to Moses, I want to give you one other thing. And he whispered in his ear. And what is the one other thing? The one other thing is called the oral tradition. The oral tradition, which is also called the unwritten law, which will eventually get written down in the form of the Talmud and the Midrash and rabbinic literature. But for centuries, it was unwritten. Now, in doing so, well, first I need to comment that in a revealed religion like Judaism, creativity must masquerade as commentary, and that's what the oral law is. If everything worth knowing is already in the law, then no one can ever add anything new of value. So if you are a Jew, or for that matter a Christian, and you have a creative idea, you must begin by demonstrating how it is already in the text. Brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So in establishing the twofold law, the rabbis established or set into motion a new form of scholarship that has no precedent in Hebrew Scriptures. The birth of a text is seen like resembling the birth of a human being. The umbilical cord which connected the text with its time and the people who produced it is severed. Once its existence becomes fact, the text begins to lead a life of its own, and whereas the process of creating the text is finite, its recreation is infinite. It is an open task for each generation, for each new reader, to reinterpret the text. Whenever a reader creates a meaningful interpretation of the biblical text, which helps him in his search for self-definition and spirituality, then the text is not only alive, but it becomes operative in his life. So another quote from Deuteronomy that in some way is viewed at odds with the first four that I opened with. It focuses on the requirement that a king shall write for himself a law on a scroll, which in Hebrew is called a Mishnah Torah. And it is translated as a copy of this teaching. The term Mishnah Torah is also taken to mean a second law or a second version. You can see what they're already beginning to do. Whereas traditional wisdom claims that a king is being instructed to write an exact copy of the law, it's clear that the rabbinic commentators thought otherwise. To their way of thinking, a king must find new wisdom in his reading of the second reading. By extension, if a king is to find new wisdom in his second reading, then students of the law must find expansive meaning in every word, no matter how straightforward and how clear the text may be. Thus, for any change in the law to be operative, it must have the same full-force legitimacy as the divinely revealed text on which it is based. Accompanying the new expansive way of interpreting the fixed law were a number of innovative advances that had no precedent anywhere in Hebrew scriptures. The first one is the development of a new character on the scene, the Rabbi, which means teacher in Hebrew. A new leader driven by a new form of interpretation and scholarship, which I've already alluded to. The twofold law superseded the Pentateuch, and it was a novel way of viewing scriptures that was nowhere, anywhere articulated in the Bible. Now, rather than a fixed law, debate, discussion, and protection of minority opinions is championed. The understanding of the oral law was enhanced by a new set of interpretive rules that were alien to the Holy Writ. Resurrection became the reward for adherence to the twofold law, a completely new concept to the Israelite kingdom. In addition to setting in motion a rubric for seamlessly transforming the unchangeable law, the Pharisaic period reinvented the Holy Writ with a movement from the priesthood and, God bless you, primogeniture, to the new leader, the rabbi, which was not an inherited position, but it was based on scholarship. It was not based on a book. It was not based on a land or on a people or on a temple. It is important to emphasize that no biblical book records a scholarly class participating in the process of revelation. And all of a sudden, that's what we now have. We have a scholarly class that will reveal more about the divine text than we actually know. The twofold law underwrites their authority and co-opts the priesthood. Quite frankly, the development of the rabbinites, the rabbis, was already beginning while the temple cult was still functioning in Jerusalem. And to the rabbis, it was antiquated, outdated, something they were uncomfortable with, but tradition, tradition. You got to keep it going because we've always done it that way, right? That's what I think should be above every church and every synagogue. We've always done it that way, right? But they were troubled by that. The Romans, of course, came along and solved the problem. They destroyed the temple and put the priesthood out of business. And how did you get to be a priest, by the way? Inheritance. Well, with primogeniture, what are some of the problems? How about if you don't really want to be a priest, but it's your family business? So that at some point the rabbis are already recording, because they fear that the priesthood is deteriorating. They're already recording all of the actions that priests are supposed to take, and there are many, so that this will be preserved for history, because who's going to remind him to wake up? It's time for you to put out the shewbread. It's time for you to get, I don't want to do that. I did that yesterday, and of course they're in it for the lamb chops, because, well, when people brought sacrifices, what got burned on the altar? The entrails, all the stuff that you would throw away, and the porterhouse went to the priests. So they probably all had gout, because they were just eating. I once asked one of our kids at a service when I was showing them the shofar. I said, "What else do you get from what do you get from a ram?" And a hand goes up. He says, "Ram chops." So they got ram chops. They got all this terrific food. But the priesthood was basically bankrupt, and there are clear comments in Christian scriptures about the fact that the Sadducees, the priests, were not exactly the most admirable characters around. So the Israelites get it on from both points of view. Ultimately, early Christians or later Christians will, you hear this in the Gospels, will denigrate both the rabbinites and the priests. But again, they are the ones that will lay the groundwork for the development of Christianity. The Pharisees did not view themselves as usurpers or revolutionaries, but rather inheritors. As proof that the rabbis bypassed the priesthood. In other words, they had no use for it, but they co-opted it, by the way. They figured it's better to have them on the inside than to go to war with them. So, for example, in the creation of the synagogue service, the place of greatest honor goes to those who are descendants of the priestly class. This way, they're on the inside. You co-opt them, and you can continue doing business, even though you couldn't care less about them. It was a brilliant move. So, as a proof that they were not interested in the priesthood, there is a midrashic comment about the transition of the law. And it says the following: Moses received the law from Sinai and delivered it to Joshua, and Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets delivered it to the men of the great synagogue. What's missing? The priests. They're not even in line because they're not interested in them. They have no use for them whatsoever, but again, they had to deal with them. So inherited succession was abandoned in favor of proven competency. How did you get to be a leader of the rabbinic community? By demonstrating skill and understanding in the twofold law. And in that way, they would be insulated against obsolescence and ensure that authority will always provide authentic, fresh, and dynamic leadership. And they are setting in motion the ability for the text to be ever changing. Always in motion is the past. Thus, God was continually making known the divine will, because birth now became an opportunity rather than a prerogative. Although co-opted, as I've mentioned, the rabbis preserved and even paid homage to the cultic functionaries who had become irrelevant because of the destruction of the temple. And that enabled the rabbis to focus on the individual and on individual salvation. What gave them power is that the violation of rabbinic enactments would endanger personal salvation. This is completely new. There's nothing about this in Hebrew Scriptures. Proof of the twofold law, the fact that the twofold law had overtaken cultic practices of the temple, is spelled out in Scriptures and is demonstrated in a very interesting historical incident in which the Roman procurator of ancient Israel, Vespasian, granted one wish to one of the leading rabbis, Yochanan ben Zakkai, as a reward for the fact that Yochanan predicted that Vespasian would become the emperor. And sure enough, in 69, while the temple is under Roman siege, Vespasian is elevated to emperor and is being sent back to Rome. But first, he seeks out Yochanan and he says, I'll give you one thing, anything that you want. Anything that you want. You might imagine that what he would ask for is end the siege of Jerusalem. But he doesn't. He doesn't ask for the restoration of the temple and its cultic priesthood. Instead, he said, all I want is an academy to be able to study the twofold law. Well, that's all I want. And so Vespasian allows him and his followers to leave the city. They go to the north, to the Galilee, where they establish their academy in a town called Yavne, because he had no interest in political power. He simply wanted to be able to study and teach the power of the twofold law. So a simple parable will illustrate the oral law and its relationship to the written law in order to address individual communal issues. A king presented gifts, the gifts of a measure of wheat and a bundle of flax to two faithful servants, one wise and one foolish. The foolish one put the flax and the wheat away in a chest, and there they remain forever. The wise servant spun the flax into cloth and made bread out of the wheat. Placing the bread on the cloth, he invited the king to be his honored guest. What's the point of this parable? That you would take the basic ingredients and transform them into something new. Another feature of the rabbinites, completely new, virtually no precedent in the Holy Writ, is the development of eschatology. The reward for the loyalty to the twofold law was the promise of personal salvation, resurrection. Most Jews actually are quite flabbergasted when I tell them that resurrection is really a Jewish concept that the early Christians adopt. That resurrection, eternal life, qualities more important than a people, a land, or a temple were now being offered. Priestly intermediaries were no longer necessary because now it was possible to have an intimate one-on-one relationship with God. So for early Christians, the reward was obedience, the reward for obedience to the always available Christ, rather than the more difficult Pharisaic obedience to the twofold law. It was just too high a price for pagan converts to Christianity to pay for salvation, when faith alone would be sufficient. Whereas the rabbinites gave up sacrifice, Christians kept the notion that Jesus is the Paschal Lamb and was sacrificed, as they retained certain cultic, priestly genres in the worship. Another concept, that's a rabbinic concept, a Pharisaic concept, the concept of the Messiah. You heard our wonderful speaker today refer to the fact that who was present with Jesus? Moses and Elijah. Why is Elijah there? The real reason Elijah there is that Elijah has a very clear role in history. And what is that? He announces the Messiah is coming. So of course he has to be standing up there. It's his job. Fruitful aside, those of you know there's something about the Passover Seder. How many cups of wine did Jews drink? 4. Excellent. And then there's another cup that's put on the table. What is that one called? The cup of Elijah. Now, most Jews think that Elijah's going to come to the Seder and go. In fact, there's that wonderful Saturday Night Live piece called Hanukkah Harry, in which Elijah shows up in all these things, all the scenes that are going on, and a guy is standing there drinking a Coca-Cola, and all of a sudden and the Coke drops, and he goes, that is not why. That is not why. Because one of the other jobs of Elijah is before he announces the coming of the Messiah, he resolves all unresolved disputes. And the rabbis had a dispute whether or not they should drink 4 cups or 5 cups during the Passover Seder. So they sort of fudged it. And the reason is because in the Bible there are 5 words for redemption. In the home Passover prayer book there are only 4 words for redemption. So he will bring me forth, he will take me out, he will carry me, and so forth. So do you drink 4 cups for the 4 words of redemption in one text, or 5 for the 5 words in the Bible? Well, the way they got around it was, you drink the 4, you put the 5th on the table, and when Elijah comes and says, you were only supposed to drink 4, you say, that's all we drank. If Elijah comes and says, you were supposed to have 5 cups, we say, no problem. We drank 4, we poured the 5th that was there on the table. And that's why we call that the cup of Elijah. So Elijah will tell us all of these unresolved. I borrowed $10 from somebody. I don't remember whether or not did I ever repay you that? You don't remember, and I don't remember. By the way, do you want to know why? There's a psychological concept called the Zirconic effect. The Zirconic effect is, this is probably going way too far afield. The Zirconic effect is once we've completed a transaction, we erase it. We push the erase button. Otherwise, our heads would be filled with all kinds of things. So that's why you don't remember, and I don't remember, because it was done. I did repay you. So there is virtually no place in Hebrew Scriptures in which there is a mention of a Messiah. Well, almost no place. For Christians, the biggie is Isaiah 7:14, which says, what? A virgin shall conceive and bear a child. Another sidebar. Just want to make sure we have enough time. In the early 1950s, when the Revised Standard Edition was being revised, one of my professors, the late Dr. Harry Olinsky, was the only Jew on the committee. And he made a case for the fact that the Hebrew in that passage, some of you are shaking your heads, the Hebrew in that passage, Alma, is never anywhere else used as a virgin. There is actually a word for virgin, and that's the Hebrew betulah, but that's not what's there. So he made the case, and the entire committee agreed, and in 1953, the Revised Standard Edition came out saying, a young woman shall conceive and bear a child. One half of the entire Protestant community said, we won't buy it. The United States Air Force said, we will not issue this to our chaplains. The House Un-American Activities investigated the Bible Committee. It was... And lo and behold, when the next edition came out, they just couldn't deal with the pressure. They inserted virgin. But that's the only place where you maybe could make a case for that. So the development of the concept of the Messiah. The next one is the portability of the shrine, the homeless God. Until the temple is destroyed, we know where to find God. You go into the, well, you have to be a certain, you have gender and whatever to go in, but you could at least approach the great temple. But the twofold law fostered the opportunity for change and growth, including a new way of viewing God. God became, the Hebrew is hamakom, every place, or the place. That's God's name. God has like 70 different names in Hebrew, and one of them is the place, because we all know where the place is, wherever we happen to be. So God now becomes portable, can be taken to any place in which the Israelites, the Jews, are ultimately scattered. And for the first time in history, you have an interesting phenomenon. A people loses its national boundaries, its government, its religion is destroyed, and up until this point, people would say, well, our gods were destroyed, and so they must not have been effective. We'll adopt the host populations God. But that was not the case of the Israelites. They said, look, some of them said, we deserve to be punished. We were terrible people. But we're going to take our God with us wherever we go. And so for the first time, God now transcends national boundaries. God is every place, acceptable, accessible to, and within everyone, everywhere. The God who could be called upon for.
If you just do it to get them to, they can clap, but we need to hear your voices.
Yeah.
So clapping is all you can get.
So clap delicately, but sing vigorously.
Okay.
Clap like this. Okay, ready? Let's do it from the beginning.
Mind the clap.
Energy. Then you started with your faces. And then Christine will be here too, that's all, right?
My life goes on in endless song. How can I keep
Listen. My life flows on in endless. My life flows on and put it in your body. Ready, and.
My life flows on in endless song. How can I keep from singing? No song catches my inmost call. How can I keep from singing? How can I keep from singing?